Let's begin the recording. Okay. All right. Hello. Welcome. And thank you for joining episode 2 of our highly acclaimed, often imitated, but never duplicated educational series where we're going to talk Salesforce, higher ed, and AI, but not always in that order. Today, we're going to go behind the scenes and talk and configure Agentforce like a pro. I'm your co-host, Mark Farrell. I'm joined by the master of AI, Matthew Palmer, also known as our Director of Client Services, and our Agent Orchestrator, Anthony Casanova, also known as our Solutions Architect. Matt, Anthony, how you guys doing today?
Doing great, Mark. We're super excited to bring the second episode of this series and kind of go behind the scenes. So we think there's going to be a lot of valuable insight today. So excited to share.
Yeah, I'm also very excited to share what we know, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to see what we got as well.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Before we get started, two housekeeping items. One, we will have a survey at the end of the webinar. We'll also be sending out an email after the webinar that'll have a link to the survey. Your comments are very important to us, especially the typed in ones. So please, good, bad, or indifferent, we'd appreciate to hear your feedback. And then two, there is a chat window. We are going to have Q&A if you want to type in questions kind of live as we go. Matt, Anthony, Mark, who is also on, can answer questions there, or we'll just run through them when we get towards the end. All right, let's get started. Oops, too many. Okay, so before I run to the agenda, I just want to say thank you. Big thank you to everyone who attended our first episode and for all of those that did fill out the survey at the end. We had a higher than average post-survey completion rate, and we were thrilled to see the responses. It made it very clear that people are interested in AI, AI isn't going anywhere, and people are excited to learn more about it, and importantly, how to use it. Even if you aren't ready to implement it yet, the curiosity is there, and you're already taking the initial steps. And that's why we're here, to talk about the AI tools that are available to you, explain what they do, how you can use them, and show you how it's built. So for our first-time attendees, welcome. We hope you will continue this journey with us as we blend Salesforce, AI, and higher education together. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we'll start with a brief recap of Agentforce and where we left off last month, when we built our agent called Appy. This should refresh everyone's memory and catch up everyone who's joining us for the first time. Then we'll go behind the scenes, under the hood, in the room where it happens, to explore the agent's architecture. We'll talk about the different agent types. We'll talk about the configuration options. And then Anthony will show you how it's built and all the components. We'll also expand our functionality of Appy to include a use case that we think you might find very interesting. Then we'll wrap up with some best practices, next steps, and leave some time for Q&A. Sound good? Well, you're all on mute and you can't respond anyway, but it's polite for me to ask. Okay, so Agentforce. Agentforce is Salesforce's ability to create agents. What are agents? Think of agents as digital employees that are designed for a specific task. They go above and beyond answering questions. They ask follow-up questions. They offer suggestions. They can even complete actions. Agents can be used internally for staff. They can also be used externally for applicants, students, etc. And they're on 24/7, and they don't take vacations. What an agent is responsible for is controlled through its attributes. You decide what the agent does, what it has access to, or more importantly, what it doesn't have access to, what channel it communicates in, like Salesforce, on mobile, in WhatsApp, in Slack. Everything is in your control. And Data Cloud brings it all together. Data Cloud is the knowledge, the brain, if you will, of the agent. We mentioned this last time. Your agent's responses are only as good as the data it has access to. So maybe you have knowledge articles that are already in Salesforce that you want the agent to access. Maybe there's Google Drive or SharePoint documents. Maybe it's student data from an LMS or the SIS. Data Cloud organizes all this data sources in one place, so your agent has all this information at its virtual fingertips. So where did we leave off? Last time we created our agent called Appy. Appy lives in our applicant portal and is able to answer any questions related to the application process. It has course info, course descriptions, requirements, prerequisites, student handbook, and other university documents. Appy can help answer specific questions, and it can even offer suggestions based off the applicant's responses. We also gave Appy access to campaigns. So Appy can recommend an upcoming event that our applicant might be interested in. Appy can even register the applicant for the event, which means creating the campaign member record, updating the registration status, and sending the confirmation email. This reasoning, recommending, processing functionality is one of the biggest differences between a chatbot that can just answer questions versus an agent which can reason, plan, and execute. So now that we're all caught up and refreshed, I'm going to let Anthony walk through our configurations. So take it away, Maestro.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. So to get started, I just want to preface everything we're about to show. It assumes that you have already set up Agentforce in your sandbox and you have done the initial configurations. After that's complete, then we're coming in over here with instructions to build the agent. So with that said, the first step you want to do is you're going to want to actually create the agent user. The agent user is going to be a user record in Salesforce. It's going to have a specific license type of, Einstein agent user, and it has its own profile and its own set of permissions. So first you set up the agent. Then you are going to want to work through and plan how you want the agent user to be accessed. In our case, it's a service agent, so it's going to be used externally on an external site. So we needed to create an inbound omni-channel flow, which is a different type of a flow. And for those of you who don't know, flow is Salesforce's automation mechanism to allow things to happen automatically, either based on record updates or based on certain events that happen. So in this case, it's a type of flow called inbound omni-channel, and that connects the agent to the site. Then we actually created the Agentforce agent itself with the specific typing of service agent, which goes hand to hand with the omni-channel flow. And then when it comes time to actually configure the agent to do the things that Mark was just talking about, you need to create something called a topic, right? And these topics kind of act as like a decision tree based off of what text is given to the chat agent. It will then scan the topics that we have available and pick the right one for the scenario. And with topics, there are actions that come with the topic, right? So if the topic was, hey, we're going to do all things related to event registration, some of your actions could be querying events that are available of certain types, seeing if the applicant's already registered for that campaign, and also stuff like creating the campaign record. Those are all actions that could be tied to a topic. And those actions, for them to actually take action on something, you need to supply it a type, right? So in our case, we supplied flows to create the actions on the topics. Other types include Apex code, prompt builder, which we're going to touch on towards the end of this demonstration, amongst couple other things that really just help allow your agent to be exposed and do things on a website. Additionally, Mark was talking about knowledge articles, right? You're allowing your agent to access your knowledge library. So we connected to the standard one, but you have full flexibility to determine like which knowledge articles the agent can see, what categories, things of that nature. And finally, we use the debug tools that Salesforce makes available internally to help streamline our configuration, right? It's good to be able to test inside the editor and not just always activate and test externally. So with that said, I think I'm gonna go over here and take over the screen share, and we're gonna go show you what this looks like in Salesforce. So here I am in Salesforce. I'm already at my setup menu, which I got to by the gear icon. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is go type in agent in the left sidebar, the quick panel. And you can see over here, we have some, drop downs that are coming up. So Agentforce configuration lives under the parent category of Einstein and the subcategory of Einstein Generative AI. And then within that, we have our Agentforce Studio. So I'm going over here and clicking on the Agentforce agents. And again, like I mentioned before, this is assuming you've already set up everything that you need to for Agentforce to be used in your org for Service Cloud. So now you can see over here, I have a few different agents listed and a couple different types. The one we're going to focus in on is service agent, but just for reference, the other types setup would be used for setup screen assistance, and the employee type would be used directly on your Salesforce apps. So maybe on a home page of a contact or the record detail page of a contact, things like that. And then if you expand this little drop down to the left of it, you can see that we have different versions available. And if you ever want to clone what you're working on, you can go ahead and clone the version here. So what I want to do now is I want to click on this applicant assistant. I'm sorry. What I want what I want to do is click on the drop down and click edit on the applicant assistant. So that way I can see some details about what this agent is doing from a high level before we even get into the builder. So over here we have our agent. It's got its name of applicant assistant, which is the internal name, not the external name. And when you're setting up an agent, you need to kind of like pretend like you're setting up an employee, like bit by bit. So first you need to give a description of what function the agent serves. So if you see the bubble icon, it says you want to explain the goals of your agent in detail, right? So for us, for our Appy example, we said deliver personalized customer interactions with an autonomous AI agent, and they could help support your common inquiries and escalate issues. Now, the next thing you want to define is a role. So what does your agent as a human, as like a AI employee, like what's it doing, right? The job description, what its tasks are, their daily responsibilities, and how is it going to interact with the customers. So for us, we told it that it's focused on helping prospective and current students with their needs for the university, as well as helping them schedule campus visits. Then finally, for this agent builder, they want to know what company the agent like works at. So for the company field, we said the company is a university that specializes in assisting students. For your use cases, you obviously would want to, get a little bit more detailed in there, but this was good enough for us to get the ball rolling. And then, of course, when you're making your agent, you specify what agent user is running the agent. And again, this is the agent user. It's got its own set of permissions. So if you want it to do certain stuff or you don't want it to do certain stuff, you could have that control at the profile level. Now, if I go to the topics tab, since this is already set up agent, we can see that there are a couple topics. In version 3, I only have 2. I'm just going to pop over to version 1 really quick just so I can show you what things would look like if you set up fresh. So over here, we have like 7 icons for topics, and they have a globe icon next to it. That just basically means it came out of the box with Salesforce. And then if you're wondering what 002B means, that also means out of the box. So it gives you an indicator of what came with Salesforce versus what was created internally on your side. So, I just want to call that out. Now going back to version 3, you can specify some messaging system settings for your agent, like what's it going to say to the person when the person first starts their conversation. So we are like, oh, hey, my name's Appy, I can help you with a wide variety of issues for, or, questions you have for admissions. And then also you get the ability to define an error message, right? I mean, sometimes, there are certain ways that a conversation could be had. Maybe very bad spelling, or they asked something that was really hard for the agent to understand. You can configure a default message that would show. And then a couple other settings over here, language, you can specify your default language. And then for a tone, you can set things like casual tone, professional tone, and, basically that guides how the conversation's generated to the person chatting with the agent. So back to what Mark Farrell was saying about how this is much better than the original agent bots. With this tone, we don't have to hard code specific outputs, right? The tone and combined with the way you're setting up the agent will allow it to just have a great conversation without all the need for manual inputs. So, and then the last thing here is we have a connections tab. I had mentioned that this is a service agent that's going to be hosted externally. So in order to have that external site connect to Salesforce and the agent, we had to set up that omni-channel flow. What you see over here are all the omni-channel flows that were linked to this agent, right? So if I were to look at this, if I was an outsider looking at this, I might think that there's 5 different websites potentially that all access the agent. But in our case, we just did a lot of testing. But so that's just like the overview of what happens when you're looking at an agent. Once you create an agent, they ask you for these basic fields, but then you can go ahead and get started. So now I'm just going to go to the builder. So over here in the actual builder, a couple of the things in the overview tab are present, right? You can see that when we land here, the topics tab's already open. But before we get any further, I just kind of like want to outline the lay of the land, like what we're looking at, where you're looking at things, so on and so forth. So in the screen right here, the left side is pretty much going to be all things configuration, where we add our topics, manage our data, our connections, etc. The right-hand side is all about the conversation preview, where you can see over here, this is the welcome message I just showed, right? Hi, my name is Appy. I'm here to help you. And this is where you could just test your conversation, right? So, and one more unique thing about the debugging that I want to call out is if you want to streamline your testing and you want to test as a specific record, you can click this little eyeball icon and it shows you all the variables that are available for all the actions that are configured on your agent. So I just know that based off what I configured, I'm going to want to go ahead and just, for this use case, add my test record to these variables. And then when I click apply, you'll see that you have two preview conditions applied. So now I can say, okay, hey, I'm going to ask the agent about upcoming campaigns. So if I say, do you know of any upcoming campaigns? Maybe I should have said events, but as you can see over here, um, the conversation begins, and as the conversation goes through, this middle section automatically transforms. It transforms into like this sort of debug window where you can see everything from the starting of the conversation, what was inputted from the user, right? The user prompt. Then based off of the prompt, it's looking through my topics. It determined that it's going to find the topic called schedule and find campaigns. And within it, there's a bunch of instructions that I'll get to in a moment. But basically, yeah, this is your overview of how it went down through the decision tree, what actions it chose, and all the very specific technical details if you need to for debugging. And then, on the right-hand side, I can keep going through the conversation if I'd like, but for now, I'm just going to pause it. But, I just wanted to first give you that lay of the land. And then finally, if you wanted to update your description, your role, or your company, if you decide, hey, I created it this way, but I want to make a change, you can just go to the settings tab in the top right. So we went through that. We went through the screen layout. We did a little bit of a test conversation to get us started. Now let's talk about the left-hand side, which is everything that you're going to do for configuration. So over here, like I mentioned, topics are what drives the agent to determine what to do when a conversation is happening. So over here on this version 3, we only have two. We have one for contact information summary, and we have one for schedule and finding campaigns, which we're seeing over here in the debug. So that's great. If you want to add a new topic, you can easily do so from this new button over here. There's an asset library of topics that Salesforce delivers to you when you install Agentforce. So that could be something to help get you started. Or, more likely you might just need to make a new topic yourself. So if you create the new topic button, it asks you like, hey, like what do you want this topic to do? So if I already have a contact summary and I already have a campaign one, maybe I want a topic that says available programs for students, right? So maybe they ask the agent, hey, what programs do you have available for um, fall 2025? And do you have accounting available for fall 2025, right? So that could be a good topic. And now after I click the label for the topic, you'll notice there's a bunch of stuff already generating. That's all Salesforce, right? Salesforce takes your topic and uses its own AI, I'm assuming, to determine what might be a good description, scope, and set of instructions that guides the agent. So I guess I might as well talk about what these pieces are. So this top piece, this classification description, is used to determine it's basically saying like, hey, pick me as a topic, right? You give it specific instructions about what the topic should do, and then every time the user gives a prompt, uh, the topics are being assessed from this classification description, right? So if you're feeling like your topic's not being hit, you probably need to enrich this description. And then for the scope, it's once you have a topic and it's been classified as the topic to be used, the scope kind of tells it what it's doing from a high, very, very high level. And then beyond that, you have the ability to add many, many instructions, however many you see fit, that will transform the experience for the student. So let me say that again. If you have a topic and it gets picked, these instructions kind of help make sure that the actions on your topic are being done properly. So to give you an example of what I mean by that, on the right-hand side, it's kind of grayed out, but for the upcoming campaign, it listed the data in a way where it's like name first, date, time, location, and it's got some bolding stuff. All that was from the instructions, right? So those instructions help transform what happens from an action. And then finally, when you create your topic, it asks you what actions you want to pick, and this list of actions. Some of them are standard from Salesforce, and some of them are created by us. So I'm not going to actually finish creating the topic. What I do actually want to do is show you the instructions piece I was talking about. So you can see how there's a set of instructions that say, when displaying the date of the event, make sure it's month, month, day, day, year, year. And that lines up with this. When someone says use the word event, pick this related action for events, so on and so forth, right? So it's just basically giving you an idea of like how your instructions shape your output from the conversation. Now, I just want to talk about actions really quick. Actions, like I said, they are part of the topic. So in this topic of scheduling and finding campaign members, we have two different actions. The first action that got hit when I selected this topic, as you can see over here, was the EventsRx query, right? So as a student, I asked if there's any upcoming campaigns. It ran through, it fired this action, and it returned returned us the campaign. Now, the next question it asks for is, do you want to register for the event? In this case, I'm going to say yes. And it's going to process the information. I'm still in the same topic. So based off the instructions, one of the instructions said to give a confirmation of the details before you register, right? So it picked that instruction. It's asking me if I think everything looks good on my end. I'm going to say yes. And when I say yes, you'll notice that the debugging window is going to now fire the other action in the topic called Create Campaign Member Registration 3. And the output result is saying you've been successfully registered for the open house. And the reason why it's successful is because it fired this action, which was tied to a flow. The flow had no errors, and it returned its output from the flow, which is a variable called campaigns to display. And then we displayed them over here, right? Now, in terms of if you want to make a new action, when you click new, it asks you what category of action you want. I mentioned before that the most important ones that you're probably going to use would be flow and prompt template, but they do have the option of Apex, API, or predictive model for a much more advanced use case. So for me, I just want to walk through what it looks like if you were to pick a flow action type, because again, that's the most likely. So if you click flow and you click in the reference action, you're presented a list of auto launch flows. And if you're familiar with flow, you'll know that an auto launch flow is one that does not fire from a record update directly. Record triggered flows, like maybe on a contact, like maybe if a visa or the student is like not a US citizen, you want to update a visa status field, that would be a record triggered flow. But for this one, because it's not, we need to pass it variables so that way the flow can accept the variables and say, okay, you gave me a contact ID, you gave me a campaign, I'm going to use that information, do some magic behind the scenes, and then as a result, I'm going to output you a result. And then it's up to the agent to take that result and based off the instructions, based off the setup, ingest the data and repurpose it in a way that's useful and user friendly. So in the example of the campaign member registration one, or let's do the events query. So in the example of the events query, if I click on the action tied to a topic, we have an editor window. I like to click the button to open in the detail page. It just gives me more real estate. It's just personal preference, but if I go here, you can see the action tied to the topic. The action is a reference type of flow. It's telling me the flow name. We got a little button to open up the flow, which I'm not going to go through quite yet, but we have the button to open up the flow. And other configuration items would be the label, instructions, and loading text. So in this use case, the instruction was saying for Agentforce, find upcoming events. Probably want to give a little more detail to that. But for this example, it was indeed sufficient. And then when the agent is thinking, when I say thinking, I mean when the agent is processing your request, it's I guess I like to say it's thinking. So that's something called a loading text. So if you want to provide loading text and show it to the student, perhaps your loading text would say, currently finding events that match your best needs, right? You have the flexibility to provide that message so that way when the user's waiting, they know why they're waiting. Then the next part, which is the most important part about this configuration, are the variables I just mentioned, right? So in the scenario where we're trying to query campaign records and find the events and show them, the input that I gave in this example, which you need to have an input always, is a contact ID, right? And in that input, the instructions say store the contact record to be updated. And I know that we're just displaying campaigns, right? So you might be wondering, why do I want the contact if I'm just trying to query campaigns? Well, it could be valuable because maybe you want to query campaigns where, this contact is not a registrant, right? All that advanced logic could be housed in your flow and then brought back by way of this output, right? So input, bringing in the contact, then output is, okay, what campaign should I display? And it's showing in the conversation as an output of an object, right? And then if I click into the flow that controls it, I was mentioning these variables, right? So in terms of a flow, I know that this is a little fast here, but in a flow, you have the ability to look at a toolbox, is what they call it. So this top left corner is the toolbox. It's where you can create variables to be used in your flow. So if you're making a flow with a mindset that it's going to be called by an agent and you know that the agent's going to have an input and an output, that might be the first thing that you want to do when you come here, right? So for us, we have a contact ID variable, and what's really important here is its availability outside the flow is set for input, right? That means that I can input it. I also have it for output. You know, that's fine. But really, the most important output in this example is the campaigns to display, right? This is what happens after the flow does its actions, it's displaying on the variable. And inside the flow, you can see that it fires. It signs the contact ID inside the flow. But over here, it's getting the campaign records where the record type is equal to yet another variable. It's a constant variable, which if this makes things easier to read, you can say record type ID is equal to record type is active is true. And I want to sort these campaigns by the start date. So that way, when they're displayed to the student, less reasoning is involved to sort it. It's already sorted. And then in flow, I'm saying I only want to show three, right? Because you might have hundreds of campaigns. You want to only focus in on the most important, most upcoming ones. So top three upcoming campaigns will be shown. So this is how, with that topic, with this action, which again, the actions must be created from a certain type. This one's flow. We are grounding the variables from the agent to the flow, and then from the flow back out to the agent. And all this was done so that way we could have this whole process work, right? And again, now that we know variables a little bit more, it makes it easier to do the debug because as you're looking through here, you can go ahead and look at the actions that are being taken. So in here, the contact ID variable has a valid value, and then the output for campaigns to display has a valid value as well. And you can double check the IDs if you want, but here it just shows you what it's done. So all that's linking together to give you some actions. Now, the rest of this part of the editor should be pretty easier to go through. So the remaining steps are, okay, now that you have your topics and actions, you'll have a data library. So that way, if you were to ask any questions or create any actions that reference knowledge, this is the configuration, right? You set your data library, you set what fields are being identified for a knowledge article, you specify what fields on the knowledge article are available for consumption. If you don't have a field checked, it won't be able to read it. And then also you have the ability to filter your knowledge articles so that way you only show ones that are publicly available, or you can show all. Or if you really have a great knowledge database, you have a lot of data categories, and maybe you only want to show certain data categories, right? So this shows you that you have full flexibility to show all or as little as you want from your knowledge base. Connections over here, again, we touched on this. These are the connections that bring you into the agent if this is an external one. And out of all these, I just want to quickly highlight the one called route. Well, this is one I made, so it's not going to be just out of the box, but we created one called route conversations to Agentforce service agents. It's doing some stuff above because don't worry about that. The most important part is that this is a omni-channel flow type as indicated here at the top. And then if you have an omni-channel flow type, you have access to different actions. So if you want to have this route to agent, you have to click the route work action, right? And in our route work action over here, Mark Ferry was talking about service channels, right? So we have a service channel set up for live message where the Agentforce agent is set up with. So we just define that we want to send it to that channel, to the Agentforce service agent, and there you go, right? So as long as the omni-channel flow gets fired and set up, when the end user clicks chat, that means that this thing fires off and we can get the whole conversation started. Now the rest over here, we have context tab. This just shows you all the variables that are, available for the current context session. So, you might not be there very often, but it's good for reference. We also have a language settings tab over here where you can set the default language for English. If you want to use all language, great. Otherwise, if you want, you could specify certain changes. So if I were to uncheck the box and refresh the page, you'll see that we have, well, it says restart the conversation. But the point is you would see a list of languages you can pick and choose for your agent. And then finally, the tone. This is really important too. You can pick between casual, neutral, and formal. So as you're building it, you might want to test out different tones to see how the conversation goes and see what you like. And lastly, for those of you super into technical debugging, we have an entire events log that shows you every single conversation that was initiated. And when you click into it, we get every single line by line detail of every single part of the conversation. So that big screen we saw in the middle, that all gets put into this events log for further review. So I know there's a lot here that was said, but I think it was really good to run through how this agent was built and, give you a better, more in-depth analysis of what parts are required to get this started. Now, there's a couple other things I want to show really quick. I kept mentioning prompt builder. So I just want to touch on what that is. I'm not going to get in the weeds of it, but I just also want to show you a couple things. So prompt builder lives under Einstein Generative AI as well. Prompt builder is essentially your way of creating little templates to access the AI reasoning models and interpret data, right? So to put it in easier words to understand, let's say you have an example of like you have a long text field called admissions essay where the students, when they apply to college, they're required to fill out an admissions essay. Maybe you give them some criteria of like what you want for the essay, how long it should be, what it should cover, and the students submit it. But you have lots of students applying to college, so it might be cumbersome to review every single one to the finest degree of detail. This is where Prompt Builder can come in and help you out with that situation. You could build a prompt builder that will have a set of instructions to ingest data that you give it, analyze it based off what you've told it to do, also analyze it based off what engine you pick, and then provide an outcome to the student to see. So I have Prompt Builder open, but what I actually want to do is show it to you live so you have a visual of what we're trying to explain. So in my example of the essay, I've got my prompt demo person. His app ID is 0001. And if I go to this section, I have my essay. And in this essay, I purposely made it kind of like not that great. I've got lots of spelling errors. It's overall pretty solid, but there's some structural issues. So, there's different ways Prompt Builder can be accessed. It could be accessed directly in the agent in a conversation, or if you'd like, you can use Flow to trigger Prompt Builder. So in this case, I built a flow where if I click this button that says generate AI summary for essay and I click save, it's going to process things. I already built the prompt builder template to ingest this data and give me an output that's helpful to admissions advisor. So over here, after thinking for a little bit, we can see our essay evaluation. We'll zoom in a little bit. But I had it built so that way it starts off with a general overview of my essay. I gave it a rubric for scoring. So I'm like, hey, score this essay based on content quality, grammar, structure, style, the likelihood that AI helped make it, and then give me an overall score with your feedback, right? So I'm not going to read every single line, but you can see over here that a real life example of it, taking the data, ingesting it, running it through a prompt template, and giving an output of either plain text or in this case a little bit more HTML savvy. So I gave it a rich text output. So that way we have a really, visually striking AI summary that could be fired from a button. So For those of you that wonder what it looks like from behind the scenes, I'm only going to do this for a couple minutes because, again, there's so much in this technology that you could spend like an entire hour going over it. So over here, I have a prompt template called emissions testing scoring. And in this builder, there's a couple components to talk about first. In the prompt template builder, I had built this so it generates a field summary. And because of that, it asked me what object I wanted. So this entire thing is based on the application object, just as a preface. Now, for this workspace is where you define your instructions for the agent. The instructions are set in kind of a unique way, so definitely want to do some research on how the best way to create your instructions are. But from an overview, I'm telling it like the goal, what your tone should be for the response, what field to ground for evaluation. So in this case, because like I said, it's application, I was able to go application, admissions essay, bring that into the instructions. I told it the output should output the results in this format. I told it the rules for the color scoring, like 1 to 4 red, 8 to 10 green, etc. And then I gave it its high level instructions like, okay, summarize the content, analyze scoring for each section. Here are the sections, and here are the instructions for scoring on a given section. And it goes down the line. And then at the end, I have to calculate the overall score and provide a 4 to 6 sentence feedback. And then because I'm, like I said, a little bit more HTML rich text savvy, I specifically told it how I want the format to be done when it gives it the result. But even without rich text, you can give it like a hey, here's all the instructions, and here's an example of what it should look like when it's built, right? So it's really giving it everything it needs to give the best result. So that's part one, instructions. Part two is the configuration of it. So you might be familiar with AI by now, right? So you might know that there's different kinds of AI models available. What's really unique about Salesforce is it has a lot of great standard models like, GPT-4 Omni, Azure OpenAI GPT-4, mostly GPT, centric from OpenAI, but they have a couple other models. So you can go ahead and test different models, see how they have a different response and, test things that way. And then if you're really tech savvy, your company might be building its own large language learning model. So, your own GPT, so to speak. So if you did have that and you went through the right steps, you'd be able to use your own custom AI model for this use case. And then the last thing I want to mention is testing is pretty easy for this. So for this, because it's application based, I'm just going to type app 001, click save and preview. I'll try a different model for fun. We'll try the Amazon model, and you can just preview it live right here. All right. So again, there's a lot that goes into, just making sure you set this up right. But once you're familiar with the technology, you are liberated and you're able to pretty much do all those magical things that everybody says, hey, I wish this could work this way. And a technical person will say, well, it can, but, right? And well, now in the world of AI, you can do a lot, right? It's pretty much the sky's the limit as long as you're aware of, the tools you have available and how you could leverage them. So that's pretty much it for the demonstration that I have for today. I really hope that there's some stuff that you have any further questions on. Certainly put in the QA. If you have any ideas for things that you'd like us to build, let us know. But with that, Matt, you can take it away, please.
Yeah, great, Anthony. That was super helpful. Let me this here. I will. So, yeah, so that was a super helpful summary. I know there's a lot there. We really wanted to put the context around it, and record it, because we behind the scenes have been rolling up our sleeves and really taking a deep dive and hopefully making this kind of consumable. And we really want to encourage you to think about use cases where you could see this fitting your institution. With that, I'm going to just provide a few slides also for reference and just summarize a few concepts that we saw as part of Anthony's configuration as well. So the first thing that Anthony mentioned is Salesforce has released certain quote unquote agent types. And so when you think about agent types, there are a couple of just notes. One, Salesforce is releasing agent types and new agent types at a very rapid pace. So, the conversation we had today versus a year from now, there probably is going to be double the amount of agent types, would be my guess, as they continue to iterate different use cases that might fit business use cases. The agent type that we demoed as part of our external agent, the one that can be quote unquote a service agent and work within like a customer portal or an applicant portal. This is the agent type that we configured and set up so it can leverage things like Salesforce Knowledge, which is a Service Cloud product. And these are some just examples that we kind of highlighted in our first webinar. Maybe they check the status of their application. Maybe they're answering questions and referencing unstructured data, such as the student handbook. So, in other words, maybe you upload a student handbook that the agent can query, as opposed to having to build like 100 knowledge articles. The agent can take action. So perhaps it can actually register or cancel event registrations on behalf of the student. It can identify their assigned counselor and perhaps schedule an appointment with that counselor. Perhaps there's a scenario where the student is prompted to provide an updated transcript or an updated essay as part of their checklist, and the agent can process that as well. These are all just examples of ways where the agent can really deliver ROI to your institution versus it just being a chatbot, right? And so that's the way you really want to start to think about, this agentic kind of future is how are the ways that the agent can be leveraged to deliver ROI to your institution. So some of the attributes that I just want to highlight again that we talked about as part of our configuration is one, it's really important to define the role that the agent has as part of your organization because that really builds context for the agent and how it processes responses. Now, one thing just to note here is the agent is only as good as the data that it has access to. Part of the power of Data Cloud is you can bring in more data and things like that. But if your data is messy and you just launch Agentforce, that can cause probably more problems than solve, right? Because it's only going to be as good as the data that it has reference to and the cleanliness of that data. So that certainly is the first step in any sort of implementation. The actions are the specific tasks that an agent is equipped to do, and you're able to set those guardrails and rules for agent behavior, really in relation to that through things like topics. And so the way you want to start to think about this is once you deploy your agent, what's different about agentic AI versus like automation as an example is if you have automation, it has the same exact result every time, right? You do X and you get Y. Well, agentic technology is not the same. It's a unique prompt response every time. It has similarities. And that's where Anthony was showing you how you can monitor the history, how you can fine tune. Those become the skills that become really valuable as you start to work with these models and really monitor and fine tune to make sure that it's giving the outputs that you want and the desires that you have. And the last thing I just want to mention here is that one of the values that Salesforce offers is through the Einstein trust layer, which is set up through Data Cloud, where as you send data, so Anthony was showing the example with the prompt builder, as that's going to OpenAI, it's running through the trust layer. So any personalized or sensitive data is getting stripped to that response to the OpenAI model, but the OpenAI model still has enough context to give accurate responses and come back. So it gives you a safe way to interact with these models with customer data where you're not having to worry about security risks. So one of the important concepts of this, Anthony mentioned, was grounding your data. You'll hear this kind of term throughout AI industry. These are just some different examples and grounding methods that are out there. So you'll see this concept RAG, if you see that, and it's basically this retrieval augmentation generation kind of is what it stands for. And what that means is if you have unstructured data, you can have retrievers that query that data, that augment it, and then generate it in the way that you want it to come through. You can build custom kind of RAG models, but you can also just use the standard Salesforce leverage like models such as Einstein libraries. So again, going back to that example of if you had a student handbook that you wanted the models to be able to reference, it could query that unstructured data in a way that structures it in a useful way back to the student. That's more of a practical use of a retriever. But really, the importance of grounding is that you give these models real world context that prevents hallucinations, right? It gives it, context in a way where it's going to be more accurate and relevant in its responses versus it being more generic in its responses as well. So the concept of grounding is an important one. And again, through that Einstein trust layer, you can do that in a safe way. And then we talked about agent topics and actions. So Anthony mentioned at the beginning that you saw some actions that are out of the box, had a globe next to it, as far as topics and actions. So the way to think about it is you have the agent, you equip the agent with a set of skills. How the agent decides what skill to pick is done through the topic. And then once it picks the topic, then it's like, okay, what's the appropriate action? That's the way I think about it, at least. So the way that you can make sure that the agent is accurate in its choosing of those skills you equip it with is to give it accurate instructions and guardrails in the topics as well as the related actions. And so without getting too technical, what kind of sets Salesforce apart in some degree is it uses an Atlas reasoning engine, which as the agent continues to choose between these topics based on certain prompts, it becomes more intelligent and more efficient and better performing over time. And so it's just a really important way to think about the architecture of this as you approach it from kind of a philosophical level. So an agent can only use an action that is assigned to them in that topic. So it's not going to reach outside of the bounds that you give it with an action in a topic. And some action types include things like prompt templates, which is what Anthony showed at the end there. It can query flow if you have a custom Apex action or an API integration. The agent can do any of those things. So it's very powerful and robust in what it can do. So one of the things you want to think through as you're thinking about deploying these agents is you're building and testing frameworks. So one of the first things you want to think about is what is the job to be done? What is the purpose of this agent and what are the KPIs that we're going to actually be able to measure as a result of this agent that we are building and developing? And so as you think about it through this kind of jobs to be done model, the first thing you want to do is to, once you select your agent type, define the topics, whether it's out of the box topics or ones that already exist or custom topics, and then classify actions within those topics. Once you set that topic instruction, as Anthony showed in that kind of UI, where as you type in the prompt, it kind of shows you its reasoning as it goes through, you can fine tune each way. So like when we built the campaign one as an example, the first like iteration of that just didn't order the data in any sort of way. So that's where in the instructions I said, please put the name of the event first. Please display the date in this way. Please, put the location. So it's giving context for the model to give the output in the way that you want it to do. And that's where you can do the refining process, like in the sandbox, as you're QAing against this before launch. And there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to necessarily go through each one of these. We wanted this more to be a reference slide, I would say. But there's just a couple of best practices when building an agent. So the first one is treat the agents like they're a complete novice. Write instructions less as directions, but more as descriptions that are meant to teach the agent about the context that the business is operating in. You should also kind of think of less is more in some ways here. So you want to be more economical in the instructions that you give it and more precise versus just overdoing it on the amount of instructions because that can impede agent performance. That kind of ties to the bottom one here, starting with minimal instructions. One of the other ones I want to mention here is use absolutes only when you really mean it. So an agent looks very closely at instructions that specify that it must, never, or always. So use those three words, must, never, always. It's going to treat those very literally. So you want to make sure that there are going to be use cases where you want to say never or you must, but you want to make sure you're using those in intelligent context as you're building your instructions. And then test individual instruction changes, not in batches. So it kind of an iterative format, test like one instruction versus the other, and so forth. So with that, again, we'll share this deck with more info, but we want to make sure that we have some time for QA as well. But Farrell, I'll let you kind of wrap things up.
Thank you. Okay, so what's next? Everyone here is on a different path or stage of their AI journey, if you will. Maybe you already decided that you're going to use Agentforce, but you don't know where to start. Maybe you need to build out some use cases so that you can get approval for funding to be able to use Agentforce. Or maybe you need help calculating the ROI to see, is this going to actually help save us money versus kind of the cost. Well, either way, the first step you want to do is make sure you have buy-in. And what I mean by that is not buy-in from like the whole university, but like buy-in from yourself and the immediate team that you're going to like put together in order to kind of go through this process, right? All the stuff that Anthony showed, all the stuff that Matt showed, things that I've talked about, right? There's steps that go along with thinking through, I don't want to say a different mindset, but thinking through the mindset of an agent and how you want it to respond, right? So there's instructions, there's descriptions, there's actions. All these things need to be kind of thought out and fleshed out. So first thing is kind of create some use cases, at least one, up to three. But what you're trying to do is trying to figure out three things. What's the trigger? So what's going to kind of kick off the agent kind of being launched or being interacted with? What are the actions? So what's it going to complete? And then what's the goal? Like what's the point of having this agent, right? So flushing out kind of a use case is going to be kind of like your second step. The third step is let's have a conversation, right? There's no commitment here. We're not trying to sell you anything here. This is like if you wanted to use Agentforce, but you don't really know kind of what to do next, this is how we would kind of walk you through it. We'd say, let's take a look at some use cases. We would probably have some questions of our own to help fill in some of the blanks. You might have some blanks already, and you might know one of these. You might know the trigger, but you might not know the action. You might know the goal, but you might not know the trigger or the action, right? But you know that here's an area where you'd want something, a solution to live. So then we can have a conversation, right? If you're an existing ERX partner, you can put a ticket in through Jira. If you're not, you can send an email to info@enrollmentrx.com. We'll set up a call and we'll just walk through, kind of like your use cases. We can help you fill in the blanks. And then we can come back at the end and say, okay, you want to implement this. This is what you want to do. Here's how we recommend it. And then here would be your next steps. Um, you know, obviously, I mean, if you're not if you haven't purchased Agentforce yet or you're not paying for it, I mean, that's a conversation you have with your AE. And again, those are things that we would kind of explain to you as far as, what the next steps go. So like I said, as far as next steps, yeah, if you're interested, if you have some ideas, I mean, we're always open for a conversation. And like Anthony said, if you have use cases too, I mean, we're open to hearing new use cases because, things that we share and I mean, other people I'm sure would be interested as well. So with that, we can go into some Q&A. We had a couple that were answered already. One of them is not. Let's go to the unanswered one. Could agents be built to actually do the testing, say for a set of baseline universal regression tests? Anthony, Matt, either one of you want to field that one?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's an agent that Salesforce has developed to actually do the testing itself. If I were to guess, that's probably on the horizon, but I'm not aware of one. They are developing more internal use case agents, such as they have a setup agent, which is meant to be for like an admin in the setup kind of interface and menu to take care of quick tasks. So I would imagine the enhancements around testing is probably coming down the line. But for our knowledge right now, most of the testing is going to be on a user basis. But Anthony, feel free to chime in with if you have any
No,
other
I
perspectives.
100% agree with what you said.
Um, we're a couple minutes ahead of schedule. Um, I don't know if anybody has any other questions.
So, so one question that we get sometimes is Data Cloud a requirement to use Agentforce? So that's a pretty common question that we get. And the answer to that is yes, there is a baseline implementation of Data Cloud that is required because that is where all the the conversations are stored and also where the Einstein trust layer is established, but not a full implementation of data cloud is required. So a partial one is, but that is a common question that we get. It's just kind of part of Agentforce. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Very good. Um, well, we'll stick around for a couple more minutes until we get to the top of the hour. Um, we want to say thank you for joining us on episode 2. We will figure out what our episode 3 is going to be and when. We'll talk about that over the next couple weeks. Again, if you have any questions even after this, and maybe it has nothing to do with kind of the topics we talked about today, but again, feel free to submit a Jira ticket. Feel free to submit an email. Um, don't forget to submit the survey at the end. If there's any ideas you have in there, please send them across. We like seeing people's ideas and trying to incorporate them into some of the things that we share and even some of the things that we create. With that, I think I want to say thank you again and adieu, farewell, Avidazen,
There's
adios.
There's two more questions actually, really quick. One of them I just got was, can this bot also live on our external website? And the answer is yes. When you're building the agent, there's a snippet in Salesforce that you can grab to just place on your site in the template to expose the agent.
And then yes, episode 1, I think Mark was putting a link. Yep. So if you're an ERX customer client partner, inside of our Rad Navigator will be links. If you're not, we also have our YouTube channel where we have them as well as I think our LinkedIn channel. There's our LinkedIn um, page. There's also links to the webinars as well.
Yeah,
All
awesome.
right, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, and just again, we're making sure that we're hosting these webinars so that you can get the most out of these tools, and you might even have some of this currently available at your fingertips in your current org. So again, as Mark Farrell mentioned, we just want to make sure you're getting content that gets the most value to you, but also in surveys, any content that you would find valuable that we can put our efforts in and provide to you as well. Please share that feedback as we take it to heart. So once again, we really thank you for your time, and we look forward to connecting in the near future.
All right, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and we will talk soon.